In January 2024, expected for the 25th of January, there will be a balance patch for 10th edition of 40k. I have some expectations from what has come before and what has been mentioned as an issue by Games Workshop staff speaking on the record. Importantly, I'm not going off rumours. We have seen a rumour document flying around which I just don't see as credible. Besides, Games Workshop works on these until the last few days before recording the commentary video and releasing the PDFs to the public, so even now, it's still in flux. There will be new points for a lot of units and some minor rules changes. This is both a points change and a rules dataslate change. I will talk first about the Sisters of Battle and the Genestealer Cult because we love them very, very much, and what they can expect. Not confirmed, but expect. Then we'll talk about changes to all the other armies that I haven't talked about so much on this channel. Then lastly, we will look at hopes and dreams, but these elements are less likely to come true. We just really, really want them. Drop cathedrals, anyone? Why am I telling you what to expect? Well, it's so you can try and sneak in some last few games with the most powerful units and think about how you will field your army in future. Really, the army list won't matter too much. Most factions will get very minor changes. I have a Deathwatch army list that I wrote before the previous point change. It has gone from 20 points under to 20 points over. Barely any change. And I'm wondering how it'll turn out this time. While all factions should get some minor changes, the Sisters of Battle are mainly fine, at least from Games Workshop's point of view. They're very playable, you can work with all the different units, and they're still a little janky and could use some improvement, but they work well. I would like it if we felt more semi-elite, then that would be good, rather than having lots and lots of infantry. The feel of the army is a little bit off for me, but tournament win rates come first in Games Workshop's eyes, so Sisters will receive little change. Astrid and Agatha will probably get a points drop. They are so rarely considered because they provide devastating wounds to a combat unit. Since it's melee attacks only, you're going to want to put them with a unit that has a lot of attacks and actually is focused on close combat because this devastating wounds only works in combat, so they go best with Sacrosants, which incidentally need a point or two taking off each model. The difficulty with putting Astrid and Agatha with Sacrosants is that their Sworn Protectors rule doesn't work, because Agatha is not a Canoness, Palatine or Junith. So the models that you put with the Celestine Sacrosants are going to be a Canoness, a Palatine or Junith, all of which will perform better than Astrid and Agatha. The Repentia will probably see a point drop of 1 point per model, so go down by 5 for 5 or 10 points for 10, because despite my preferences, Repentia are not chosen over Arcoflagellants. There is a whole video I have explaining the differences between Repentia and Arcoflagellants, what they do better, and why you may want one or the other. They may go up in points rather than down if there is a rules change for them, but I will talk about that later because it's very much in the hopes and dreams section. I expect that a pair of Death Cult Assassins will go down by 5 points. They are too rarely considered compared to the Crusaders. The Crusaders get a better invulnerable save. The Crusaders are cheaper and still perform the same kind of role. They're a cheap unit there to perform actions and to be an excellent distraction for this stratagem. So you charge in 2 units, one of which is the Crusaders or Death Cult Assassins. Using this stratagem, your opponent's supermassive monster, that is just the one model, can only attack the Crusaders or Death Cult Assassins and not your more valuable other unit, which may be there to provide lots of objective control or to do the actual killing in the case of a Palatine. Yes, Death Cult Assassins have precision, so they can do assassination attempts, but that doesn't account for the difference in points values that we currently see between the Crusaders and Death Cult Assassins, so I expect the Assassins to drop a few points. Retributors. Retributors are still too expensive. The way you run Retributors currently is you put them in an Immolator. They get out of the Immolator, and because of the Immolator special ability, that unit can then reroll all their wounds. It also keeps the unit safe because this is a group of 5 sisters, you cannot increase that size, and they can be killed really easily because they all have 1 wound and toughness 3. Immolators I like, and they are currently the main way to run Retributors. Yes, you can have, say, 4 heavy bolters as a Retributor squad on foot, but if you're doing that, and your collection allows it, then you'll probably want to pay 25 more points for a Castigator, and then you swap 4 heavy bolters for 3 heavy bolters and a massive cannon. And it also comes with a profile that will endure. So the Castigator may go up in points. Doesn't seem quite right that it's cheaper than the Exorcist by 20 points. Now the Retributors started this edition costing more than the much better and very similar Space Marine Devastator squad. And the Retributors are still not seeing tabletop use outside of an immolator to get those rerolls to wound. So I would not be surprised if the Retributors went down in price, and to stop everyone forever taking Retributors in an immolator and never anywhere else, increasing the cost of the immolator. But then the worry is, if they increase the cost of the immolator, that may set Retributors and immolator as the only way to take the immolator. And so all we've done is reverse the problem. But a reduction in Retributors may see more play for Retributor squads. The Paragon Warsuits I expect will be slightly reduced in price, maybe just 10 points. They work well with Morwen Val in her big suit, but otherwise they are lacking in power and especially toughness. They have a profile that is a slight increase on a Terminator for far more points. If they go down in points, then there will be none better. Oh shush, you love it here. Morwen Val may also get a points drop if the Nundum combo is not cropping up at tournaments, but from what I can see, it still is. Other than that, I think there will be very little in the way of unit changes. But if Games Workshop wants to sell more of the Sister Novitiates box set, and not just so you can kit bash all the different characters out of them, then they may reduce the Novitiate squad by 5 points as well. As an enhancement, the Blade of Eleanor is taken really often. On the Palatine especially, but we also see it on Canonesses and on Preachers. Now Games Workshop may leave the points of it as is. It has been mentioned before in MetaWatch videos that if they increase the points of something that is such a core part of competitive and tournament armies, people will still take it. Then they increase the points again, people still take it. Points go up again, and then it is never seen in any army anywhere. For an enhancement, this is less of an issue, as Games Workshop doesn't sell enhancements or tokens to represent enhancements as like a physical model, but I wouldn't put it past them in the future. While the Mantle of Ophelia is a rarely considered enhancement compared to the others, and while it did see play fairly often in previous editions, not so much in 10th. So that may get a points reduction. Now if you already use it, give it some love in the comments. Which character do you add it to? I would love to know. Coming in from underground, my expectations for Genestealer Cult. The Patriarch is not making it into competitive army lists. What is all of the core infantry. I think the Patriarch is really good. One of my most popular videos is all about the Patriarch, and a bit about the Acolytes as well. But despite being the overall faction commander in the same way as like Morwen Val and the Lion are, it's not having a lot of impact. And we know that the Genestealers, the only unit that it can go with, are not a core part of the Genestealer Cult. Get out of here with that thinking. So the Patriarch may drop by a few more points, but they're already cheaper than the Primus. The Magos could become the cheapest unit for 40 points or 45, as they continue to be underwhelming, and I could see them taken maybe in the same way as Eldar Warlocks. You could have just a little dude there. Sure, they're going to get hit by indirect fire, but they could be there to just perform actions and block like narrow alleyways. That's not ideal for a Genestealer Cult Magos, but if their points go down, that could be a role for them rather than the current role, which is sitting on the shelf. The Saboteur will probably go up a few more points as they get taken in pretty much every competitive Genestealer Cult list as 1 or maybe 3, the maximum you can possibly take. From the Codex, I expect to see a slightly more toned down Saboteur and hope to get better abilities for the Patriarch and the Magos, like some better psychic powers or a choice of 2 different abilities. But that's a hope for the future. The Metamorphs got a point reduction last time, but they still don't measure up to Acolytes with demo charges and mining weapons. Metamorphs are viable, certainly, but when a very similar unit, so similar they come in the same box and have the same torso, which provides better damage and better objective control, then the Metamorphs may see another 5-point reduction. I think there's unlikely to be a points boost on the Acolytes or the Neophytes. They've already gone up quite a bit, and they are the core of the army. If you change them too much, then the whole faction just becomes so much harder to play without relying on Brood Brothers. The Genestealer Cult win rate is officially 50% last MetaWatch, so there is unlikely to be any major change, just a little bit of redressing for the internal balance. I have more hopes for the Genestealer Cult, but feel they are so unlikely, I'll put them later on in the video. For all of the other factions, well, I'm not going to cover all factions. For some of them, I do just have no idea. I haven't played them or haven't played against them, so in humility, I shouldn't really comment. You can, of course. That is what the comment section is for. Doesn't matter if you haven't played them or played against them. You can tell me what you expect to happen. We've all been watching what Games Workshop does. we can all give some idea. I'm just going to choose not to because this video is long enough as it is. Slowly over 10th edition, Games Workshop has been getting closer to that everything is about right, fair, for competitive and tournament play, 50% kind of rating. They've also mentioned they want to work on internal balance so that all of the different units are still seeing play. Because if they're not seeing play, they're not selling those kits. How the game is going to be affected going forward, we're going to have to see the changes before we know for sure. And when they come out, I will have a video explaining the changes, especially for Genestealer Cult and Sisters, and some other factions will creep in. When I've made predictions before, they have been absolutely correct for my local meta. Turns out I don't have access to Laplace's demon and can't explain what's going to happen all over the world and at your local club. But I think from this balance patch change, there's going to be pretty minor alterations. But we're not done yet. We need to talk about all the other factions. For the Codex Space Marines, Blade Driven Deep should probably go up in points. Perhaps also the Genestealer Cult version, Meticulous Planner, but that isn't as bad. This rule gives Infiltrate to a unit that would not otherwise have it. So when you can put Manius Kelgar and a lot of Gravis Marines onto the middle of the board as something that once they get close and do some killing, or to just be a really big roadblock right from the start of the game, and it's becoming quite the tournament staple, I can see it going up in price. The Deathwatch Tome of Ectoclades enhancement could become another copy of Oath of Moment. It was a copy of it from the start of the edition, when you could reroll all hits and wounds, but that may be changed to resemble its current version. Oath of Moment now is you reroll all hits, and that's it. There's no reroll wounds. So that may go down in points as a result. The Dark Angels, I think, will not change. I think they may just leave it for their codex, but will not be able to say which points have precedence, the January balance patch, or the slightly later codex points. If you are a Dark Angels player, you'll have to use the January balance patch points, and then further along the lines, it may be mentioned which one you use. I would assume the January balance patch until there is another balance patch, so if there are points included in the Dark Angels codex, I would expect them to be invalid immediately. The Black Templars Crusaders should go up in points. They were reduced far too much for their unit ability, and it is shown in tournaments as the Black Templars are the most popular Divergent chapter to use their own chapter detachment. A lot of the other chapters, like the Space Wolves and the Death Watch, they are using their specialist units in Codex Space Marine detachments, which is a totally valid way to play them. But they're not using their own chapter detachments. For the Imperial Guard, I don't know what to change. I have only used them this edition as Brood Brothers. The Field Ordnance is a little bit overpointed compared to the heavy weapons teams like the Light Mortar. And from discussions with people in comments about Brood Brothers, the Army Special rule of the Imperial Guard could get a boost. Something like, if your unit has been issued an order, then you also get sustained hits. None of the orders that they can have already give them sustained hits, so this would be an extra bonus, and the detachment gives the unit lethal hits if it remains stationary. So a stationary unit with lethal hits and sustained hits plus an extra shot from rapid fire, now you're stacking on the buffs quite effectively. And I think it would suit their style of play, with the officers being even more important now. Would that suit and help their pretty low win rate? Let me know if that's a good idea or way off the mark. And if you work for Games Workshop and that is in the rules patch, then I would like some credit, please. For the Orc lads, a lot of their tactics are about putting combat units in trucks. And we're seeing very little variation of that at tournaments. Now, rather than increase the chopper unit points and decrease the Daka unit choices, Games Workshop may go for a truck point increase. That way, abilities like Dad Jump, already very good casually, but is more likely to be screened out competitively, becomes a decent choice over the truck itself. There is a new Orc Codex in springtime, so changes may be limited for now, but they do have a current win rate that fluctuates between high and too high. So I'd expect a general toning down of the Orcs. The Eldar continue to perform incredibly well at tournaments. And those Eldari Night Spinners are very much in the crosshairs of Games Workshop. They replaced Fire Prisms as the go-to Eldar tank, and they are a pain, with indirect fire that not just reduces movement, but also turns off the ability to advance. Perhaps that's a unit rule that will be changed, as other units, like the Basilisk, only reduce advance rolls by 2, not turning off the ability completely. Their cannons also have Twin Link to cause damage with the ability to reroll wound rolls. So this is a unit that inconveniences you and also kills you. Yeah, I can see it going up in points. I know people would like to see a big change to the Fate dice to bring them in line with the Sisters, or change the Eldar detachment rule to have a reroll to hit, but not the reroll to wound, or vice versa. That alone could rebalance the faction and see a greater use of heavy weapons besides lots of Bright Lancers. But as the Games Workshop staff have no doubt said, hey, let's talk about Eldari buffs. I listened to Proxy Hammer on his channel, which is all about Eldar, and he's appeared on this channel before. Howling Banshees are underperforming, especially next to other Aspect Warrior units that do combat, like the Striking Scorpions. So a few points off the Howling Banshees wouldn't be too bad. And I don't think anyone competitively would complain. Can't say a lot about Necrons. I have played against them since their Codex drop, but only against players that didn't have the Codex yet and so were still using the Index. But very soon I will be in a Crusade tournament against Necrons and I will hopefully see all their different kinds of detachment. But for now I have no notes. Sorry. But copying the Necron notes from the comments section of my videos, probably Wraiths and Catan are gonna take a bit of a hit. Chaos Warriors are doing really well. Those Chaos Space Marines Forge Fiends can have devastating wounds, and from the detachment, they can also have sustained hits. That's quite a nice combination. Lots of shots gives you more chances to get more sixes in the wound rolls. I think just a point increase on them and some of the cultist units, especially the Accursed Cultists, which have the ability to get models back in every player's command phase. That's quite a few. So you either wipe them out, or they just stay at full strength for most of the game. And that seems to be the way to play Chaos at the moment. Lots of cultists with some heavy support. So the Accursed Cultists especially should see a points increase. The Death Guard, their cultists are not overpowered, but Nurgle's boys did really well from the last big balance patch with an extra disease to reduce armor or hit rolls as well as reducing enemy toughness. Players are happier with them. Unless you want it to be tough again, like in the previous editions. Then players are not so happy. But the vehicles could do with a little bit of points increase. I find the Plague Burst Crawler and the Blight Haulers, they're a bit too optimal as choices. It is rare that I see 1000 points of Death Guard without 2 Plague Burst Crawlers, or 3, the maximum allowed, in 2000 points. There's nothing super wrong with that, but a little bit of points increase on them to allow other units to shine more couldn't hurt. The Votan are also improved after having a rules change so that the enemy starts with grudge tokens already assigned. I don't think the Votan players with their small range of unit choices would mind a little bit of a points increase. If we could keep the Horde factions and the Elite factions points clearly different, that would be great. Looking especially at the Death Guard and the Sisters of Battle. The Imperial Knights, after the changes to Towering, after the army rule changes and the points increase, the Knights have struggled. And all of the fingers crossed hope online seems to be that they should get the Bondsman abilities back on the very big Knights, which seems fair. And then you can start seeing more Knights taking to the field again, outside of like Legions Imperialis, that new game from Games Workshop. Chaos Knights, they could do with a little bit of a points decrease on the bigger Knights, just so the army is something other than lots of War Dogs. The War Dogs seem to be carrying the list at the moment, with some support from armies like Chaos Demons, because Chaos Demons can be taken as allies to Chaos Knights. And that's how the Demons get used the most. They are support units for other Chaos armies. So the Nurglings may go up in price, but the Demon Core, like the Demonettes and the Bloodletters, may see a little bit of a points decrease. And having reduced cost Bloodletters may see them get taken a bit more often in World Eaters armies. And if there was a pure Emperor's Children Codex, then the Demonettes may get taken with them. You can still run Emperor's Children as it stands, but the cost of Demonettes at the moment, you're unlikely to include them. The Custodes haven't done so great since the changes to the Aegis of the Emperor. I have mentioned in another video how we can exploit rules that stop mortal wounds, but not devastating wounds. So changing the Aegis of the Emperor to resist both could be a good move. And I think Games Workshop will go with changing that one rule rather than going through every single faction, looking at every index card, seeing which ones resist mortal wounds, and changing that to say mortal wounds or devastating wounds. Because not every faction needs to have their unit pulled up a bit more. This could be a targeted improvement for the Custodes, which are struggling in terms of the meta. I'm not expecting the Custodes to change too much, as they will be getting a Spring Codex in a couple of months, but they will need tiding over until then, at which point another points change will be needed to make any points in that codex invalid on launch. The next points change expected in April. So for the Tyranids, which have the non-emissary, which has that particular rule of resisting mortal wounds but not devastating wounds, that'll probably stay where it is, but gargoyles may go up 5 or 10 points. The gargoyles are fast. They move 12 inches, and then they can advance and still shoot with their assault flesh borers, and then they can move another 6 inches after doing that. So that is up to 24 inches as a move. Sure, the Eldar Warp Spiders can do that, but why would Games Workshop nerf Eldar that much? But the Warp Spiders may go up in points. The Gargoyles going up in price will see the Hormigants and the Termagants, also both quite speedy, hoardy kinds of gaunt creatures in the Tyranid list, they become more attractive, and Games Workshop is wanting to sell the new Hormigant and Termagant kits. There is no new Gargoyle kit, so unless Games Workshop is trying to get rid of existing stock, because there is a little bit of a and now we weight the point slightly for price increases and sales requirements, so gargoyles going up in price. The Drukhari are very low down, and as they are so low down, rather than heavy points changes, Games Workshop will probably take this opportunity to do what they did with the Votann and the Death Guard and change the army rule instead of making witches like 70 points for 10 models. What they could do is have a pain token boost the melee a bit more. A lot of the Dark Eldar units are combat focused. Dark Lancers are already helping the faction to do well at range, but if they had pain tokens provide a reroll to wound in combat instead of reroll to hits, it would really boost the Witches and Incubi power excellently. This will also mean that a change to Drukhari helps Drukhari players. If there is a change to Drukhari unit points, that will serve to make the Ynnari Eldar much better. So a army-wide faction rule change is what I'm expecting for the Drukhari. And hoping, because as we saw in my more recent video, it feels like playing on hard mode when you put a Drukhari army on the table. That's a fun video, you should watch that. The Admech, I just hope the Admech get better. They are currently a horde. They're hard to paint, they're expensive to buy. I would prefer something in the rules that boosts them and get a points increase to compensate on all of their models. I doubt that's going to happen, and so we are now firmly in the hopes and dreams section of this video. This is where we have the things that I hope will change. It is my hope that you consider giving me some tip money. January is usually the worst month for YouTube video creators, so if any of my videos have helped your game or given you joy, just like at a restaurant, you can give some tip money so that I can afford tea in the cold weather. That's appreciated. Cult Ambush, if that could change to do something better, that would be great. I rarely get anything out of our army special rule, and neither do most of you. If I'm winning, it doesn't come up. If I'm losing, then it's just something that delays the inevitable. If we had the detachment special rule as the army special rule, so that the Genestealer Cult were always coming up from reserve and doing well, then we could have this detachment focused around something else. So I don't think it'll happen, but it would be nice if the Acolytes and Neophytes got a little bit of a points decrease because of how little the army special rule comes up, even for them. Same for all of the other main units, not characters. But since we're about 50% win rate, I don't think that will happen. I would love to have the Magos and the Patriarch have some psychic powers that are useful, but we may have to wait for the Codex unless Games Workshop wants to try something out before people buy the Codex. If Games Workshop potentially want to do something extra with Battle Shock, then the Patriarch becomes a lot more viable. And if there is something like that, I will be plugging the Patriarch as a go-to character. But unless that happens, the Magos and the Patriarch are going to be left on the sidelines of a lot of people's army. It would be nice if the Acolytes could have a separate cost for the demolition charges, but this is very much hopes and dreams. Games Workshop won't do that. And the powerful demo charges will be forever costed alongside an auto pistol and knife or the heavy mining weapon. Actually, I would love a definitive FAQ answer on when Acolytes get demo charges back. From the kind of suggestions and rules changes and wording that Games Workshop has provided, we have been playing it as you only get the demo charges back if the whole unit is destroyed and returns as an identical but new unit through Cult Ambush. You do not get the demo charges back if you return the model with the Cult banner. Games Workshop can answer that frequently asked question, but they haven't so far, so probably not. Now, Sisters of Battle characters. Remember I said that Agatha can join like 4 different units, but her ability gives devastating wounds in melee only. Giving it to shooting would probably be a bit too intense, but if she could join more combat-based sister units, that would be great. If Agatha could join Arco-Flagellants, yeah, I don't think we would see any other combination being taken. If she could join Repentia, that would make the Repentia much more viable. The Repentia units currently cannot be joined by any characters. So if they were to go up in points, which I would be okay with, as long as they can be joined by certain characters. At that point, they can outperform the Arco-Flagellants that they're currently pointed exactly the same as. 130 points for 10. With a Palatine to give lethal hits, a Preacher to get +1 to wound, or the more obvious Missionary to get sustained hits, which would go well with their current unit ability, which lets them reroll hit rolls as long as their superior is still alive. The Dog Martyr, as a character, is based around being the overseer of sisters who can send one of them to become a Repentia. That she can't lead Repentia is kind of weird. She is ostensibly a combat character, although her boosts are to objective control. She also has a 6+ leadership, one better than most of the other sisters units. So if she was leading Repentia and they took a lot of casualties, which is kind of inevitable when you don't have armor, then they're more likely to pass Battleshock in future turns. So having a list of these characters can now join Repentia, that would be really nice. Then I wouldn't mind a Repentia points increase. If the Drukhari had some kind of rule to say, hey, unit abilities can work from within transports, they count as being on the table for things like the Archon being able to turn off enemy stratagems, and for using our own stratagems, like the whole thing where you need the 3 different characters on the table at once, which doesn't work if one of them is in a transport. I explain a lot more what's wrong with the Drukhari in this video, but I think what we will get is an improvement to how power from pain works. I would love to have the Grey Knights see more anti-demon weapons, just a few, or some anti-tank weapons, because they very much still lack anti-tank. A lot of their anti-tank is coming from bigger models, and they are kind of expensive and don't provide that much of a punch. Otherwise, you're looking at Legends and Forge World units, things that come in separate documents rather than the index of the Grey Knights. Slightly more possible is Deathwatch kill teams having separate points for the different types of Marine. So a Terminator in a Proteus kill team costs a set amount of points and more than a veteran. Right now the points are stupid for things like this, but I talk a lot more about that and the continuing issues with points in this video. I won't spoil it if you haven't seen it, but there it is, and I talk more about the kill teams in there. As with all things to do with Warhammer rules, we will likely see the current mess change with the January announcement into a slightly different rules mess. So is the way of 40k. Have a great day.